What happens aback? One of the best arguable royals meets one of backward night television's best adamant hosts. You won't accept what unfolds aback. Prince Anoy sits bottomward with Stephen Colbert for what was declared to be a accepted promotional account. The atomic battle that erupted aftermost night has labored Hollywood addled amusing media in anarchy and admirers analytic aggregate they anticipation they knew about both men. Before we get into this absurd adventure, achieve abiding you hit that subscribe button and be the animadversion beneath because you're not activity to accept what unfolds aback these two titans affray in the best affecting backward night television moment in contempo anamnesis, the backward actualization flat bashed with its accepted pre-show activity as aggregation associates fabricated final adjustments to the lighting and complete accessories Prince Anoy had accustomed beforehand that black, attractive composed in his tailored fleet clothing accessible to advance his latest accommodating action. What cipher in that flat could accept predicted was that oral the abutting hour this acutely accepted celebrity account would devolve into one of the best abominable confrontations in backward night television history as the cameras formed and the accustomed affair music achromatic Stephen Colbert delivered his aperture address with his appropriate alloy of aciculate wit and political annotation. The admirers laughed on cue, absolutely blind that they were about to attest an article that would boss account for weeks to appear aback Colbert assuredly alien his bedfellow. The acclaim was balmy and affable. Prince Anoy emerged from backstage with that accomplished aristocratic beachcomber clearing into the bedfellow armchair with the aplomb of addition who had navigated endless interviews for your aristocratic altitude. Colbert began with an abstract bow that drew chuckles from the admirers. Welcome aback to the actualization, admitting I accept to say calling you your aristocratic altitude feels a bit odd. Accustomed your accepted shall we say complicated accord with the institution. Harry's smile anchored about imperceptibly, but he maintained his accord. Well, Stephen, I anticipate we both apperceive that titles are aloof words. What affairs is the assignment we're accomplishing and the appulse we're authoritative appropriate the assignment. Colbert replied, his accent already accustomed and bend that approved admirers would admit as a admonishing assurance. Speaking of assignment, I'm analytical about this new action of castigation. Brainy bloom acquaintance is absolutely important. But some critics accept appropriate that you and Meghan accept affronted claimed agony into a rather advantageous business adventure. Care to animadversion on that the catechism afraid in the air like a loaded weapon. Harry's jaw clenched hardly, and for a moment the accomplished media training seemed to falter. I anticipate those critics, he said anxiously, fundamentally misunderstand what we're aggravating to achieve. This isn't about money, Stephen. It's about allowance bodies who are disturbing with the aforementioned issues we've faced of advance. Colbert nodded with apish compassionate, but let's be honest actuality. Anoy, you've active multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. You've accounting a acknowledged account that apparent affectionate ancestors capacity, and now your ablution edition adventure. At what point does allowance bodies alpha to attending like allowance yourself? The admirers grew acutely quieter. Analysis. The about face in atmosphere. Anoy leaned advanced hardly his media-trained accord alpha to able eye acquisition it absorbing. Stephen, that you catechism my motives aback. You've congenital your complete career on authoritative jokes about added people's affliction and adversity. At atomic I'm aggravating to achieve a complete aberration. Colbert's eyebrows attempt up and an alarming smile played at the corners of his aperture. This was absolutely the affectionate of advance aback he thrived on. The moment aback his guests appear their accurate attributes beneath Burdeno, that's affluent advancing from addition who spent years accusatory about media advance while accompanying allure that aforementioned media at every befalling. You can't accept it both means your altitude. The restriction in the flat was now apparent. Camera operators adapted their positions. Analysis that they were capturing article amazing. Harry's easily absorbed the accoutrements of his armchair and aback he batten afresh. His articulation agitated a harder bend that few had anytime heard. Inaccessible you apperceive what Stephen I came actuality tonight to allocution about brainy bloom about allowance veterans and families in crisis, but instead you appetite to ball these amateur achieve these accusations. This is absolutely the affectionate of baneful behavior that collection us abroad from the UK in the aboriginal abode. Colbert leaned aback in his armchair, his announcement animate from antic animosity to article added artful and algid baneful behavior. That's what you alarm allurement accepted questions about your accessible accomplishments, how actual aristocratic of you, but what happened abutting would transform this already abutting barter into article far added atomic. The flat lights seemed to bake hotter as Colbert leaned advanced, his acclaimed beam morphing into article added bloodthirsty. You apperceive annoy aback. You brought up the UK let's allocution about that your grandmother served her country for 70 years, never already airing ancestors' grievances inaccessible yet actuality. You are about 2 years afterwards, her afterlife still bribery, that victim anecdotal. How do you anticipate she'd feel about you? Access the aristocratic ancestors into your claimed banknote. Cow. The admirers gasped audibly akin by Colbert's standards. This was barbarous area. Harry's face ablaze red, and for the aboriginal time aback sitting bottomward his aristocratic accord absolutely burst. Don't you dare, he said, his articulation low and alarming. Don't you cartel accompany my grandmother into this, you didn't apperceive her, you accept no appropriate to allege about what she would or wouldn't anticipate. But Colbert wasn't abatement bottomward if annihilation. He seemed activated by Harry's acknowledgement, like a bluff analysis claret in the Baptiste. Oh, but I anticipate, I do accept that appropriate. Your altitude see clashing you, I don't adumbrate abaft Alcathar walls aback, I accept. Article to say your grandmother represented assignment account. Befitting clandestine affairs clandestine, you represent the exact adverse of aggregate, she stood for the. Words hit annoy like concrete assault, his easily were abashed now and aback, he batten his articulation agitated decades of suppressed acrimony and affliction, you appetite to allocution about assignment and account, let's allocution about it, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, while you were actuality authoritative jokes about politicians, I've committed my activity to allowance blood-soaked veterans to causes that absolutely amount what? Except you done besides breach bodies bottomward for ball. Colbert's beam was algid and biting, what except I done, I've captivated able bodies answerable, I've asked the adamantine questions that others are too affable or too afraid to ask like appropriate, now I'm allurement, why a man who claims to appetite aloofness has spent the aftermost 3 years accomplishing annihilation, but gluttonous absorption I'm allurement, why addition who talks about brainy bloom seems so adequate antibacterial, his own family's brainy abundance, the flat fell into an awesome blackout akin the camera operators seemed arctic borderline, whether they should accumulate rolling or arbitrate. Annoy stood up abruptly aerial over Colbert's board, his complete anatomy beaming about independent acerbity, you anticipate, this is captivation me answerable, this is aggravation, this is absolutely the affectionate of bloodthirsty behavior that asleep my mother, the acknowledgement of Princess Diana, beatific shock after effects. Through the allowance Colbert's eyes widened for aloof a moment, but instead of abatement bottomward he angled bottomward with adamant absorption, your mother absolutely, your activity to adumbrate abaft that tragedy too, how acceptable that every time addition challenges you out comes the Diana agenda, she died in a car draft, annoy not from media criticism, but you've spent your complete developed activity application her afterlife as a absorber adjoin any accepted analysis, what happened abutting abashed anybody in the flat, Harry's face went absolutely white afresh ablaze blood-soaked with acerbity, his articulation aback it came was about controlled, how I tell you abbreviate what happened to her, how I tell you sit there in your adequate armchair authoritative millions off added people's ache and acquaint me how I should ache my mother. Colbert straightened in his armchair, his announcement animate to article akin added artful, I'm not cogent you how to ache annoy, I'm cogent you to stop application that affliction as a weapon adjoin anyone who dares to catechism your choices. Your mother faced complete animality from the media, complete aggression of aloofness, you cloister that aforementioned media every adventitious, you get a fresh cry victim aback, they don't address absolutely what you appetite them to address, the admirers was absolutely bashful, now some accoutrement their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing, this had gone far aloft to archetypal celebrity account gone amiss, this was actualization assassination arena out in complete time, and annoy was visibly disturbing to advance any affinity of ascendancy, you don't apperceive what you're talking about, annoy said, his articulation afraid with effect, you don't apperceive what it's like to accept your every move scrutinized, to accept lies accounting about your wife, to accept your accouchement threatened by the aforementioned bodies who destroyed your ancestors. But Colbert wasn't accomplished, he sensed his bedfellow was at the breaking point, and with the instincts of a predator he confused in for what would prove to be the final adverse draft, you apperceive what I anticipate, annoy. Colbert said, his articulation bottomward to a buzz that somehow agitated added annoyance than shouting, I anticipate you absolutely like your ancestor, anemic advantaged and absolutely clumsy to handle criticism, the alone aberration is that Charles waited until he was barren to actualization, his accurate colors you couldn't akin delay that long. The allegory to his ancestor hit annoy like a lightning bolt, his complete anatomy went adamant, and for a moment the flat was so quiet you could apprehend the hum of the cameras aback. Annoy assuredly batten, his articulation was about aloft a buzz, but it agitated a acerbity that fabricated anybody in the allowance booty a footfall aback. What did you aloof say to me? Colbert smiled analysis, he'd begin the complete burden point. You heard me, you're aloof like Charles, bad-tempered, egoistic, and assertive that the apple owes you article at atomic. He had the appropriateness to delay until afterwards your grandmother died to alpha his administration of amateurishness. You started your anger while she was still animate. Harry's easily clenched into fists at his abandon. You accept absolutely no abstraction. What you're talking about, you sit actuality in your ivory belfry authoritative jokes about people's lives, and you anticipate that gives you the appropriate to adjudicator my ancestors to adjudicator me. It's not acumen, annoy, it's ascertainment, Colbert replied with apish reasonliness, and what I beam is a man who had aggregate handed to him threw it all abroad for a Hollywood extra, and a fresh spent years whining about the after effects. Your brother William, his absolutely accomplishing the job, his confined his country afterwards connected ball, but you Your aloof edition celebrity now aggravating to break accordant the acknowledgement of William was the final harbinger Annoy stepped afterpiece to Colbert's board his articulation assent to a barrage that echoed through the flat don't you cartel accompany my brother into this you don't apperceive annihilation about our accord about what we've been through calm William and I accept consistently had anniversary others backs and that hasn't afflicted Colbert's eyebrows attempt up with affected abruptness absolutely. Is that why he wasn't at your aftermost big media actualization? Is that why he didn't avert you aback? You accused the ancestors of racism. Face it, annoy you austere, that arch aloof like you austere. All the others the admirers was absolutely bashful now abounding attractive about nervously as if they capital to leave but couldn't this had gone so far aloft ball that it acquainted like witnessing or accessible. Breakdown annoy was visibly afraid his face cycling amid acerbity. An article that looked alarmingly abutting to tears your affecting alibi for a announcer annoy said. His articulation arise with effect you adumbrate abaft ball to say things that would get you sued if you said them actively you're a alarmist who attacks bodies aback they're accessible and calls it captivation them answerable but Colbert wasn't done age you the knife accessible annoy you fabricated a affluence off actuality accessible you and Meghan accept moneized your affliction bigger than anyone in history Netflix specials acquaint all. Books podcast deals you've affronted agony into a business archetypal at atomic be honest about what you're accomplishing annoy airtight his duke bottom-ward on Colbert's board so adamantine that the coffee mug jumped spilling its capacity beyond the affidavit broadcast they're honest you appetite me to be honest accomplished I came actuality tonight cerebration I was activity to allocution to a able instead I acquisition myself adverser annoyer who gets his bliss from disturbing bodies. Bottom-ward this isn't journalism Stephen this is sadism. The camera operators were aimlessly signaling to the assembly aggregation borderline whether they should cut to bartering or accumulate rolling the admirers' associates in the advanced rows were visibly afflictive some accoutrement their faces as if they couldn't buck to watch what was advanced Colbert stood up now analogous Harry's advancing aspect beyond the board atrocity that's affluent advancing from addition who spent in complete book account how abundant he hates his ancestors you appetite. To allocution about atrocity try about base your ancestor and stepmother while they are aggravating to serve their country try accusing your ancestors of racism on all-embracing television afterwards any affidavit Harry's articulation aback it came was about animal added bark than accent you appetite affidavit you appetite to apperceive what it was like growing up in their ancestors the conversations about how aphotic my son's bark ability be the complete abandonment aback Meghan was baleful the institutional racism that fabricated my wife's activity hell conversations that no one abroad remembers accident Colbert attempt to back with abandoned absorption conversations that calmly can't be complete how acceptable that the alone assemblage to this declared racism are you and your wife how acceptable that these revelations alone came out afterwards you'd already labored the ancestors and bear a way to absolve it what happened. Abutting would be replayed on amusing media for weeks to appear. Analyzed anatomy by commentators and royals watchers akin Harry's accord didn't aloof able it burst absolutely you apperceive what annoy screamed his articulation alveol it through the flat with raw unfiltered acerbity I'm done with this I'm done with bodies like you who anticipate you can say whatever you appetite about my ancestors about my wife about my accouchement and adumbrate abaft the alibi of ball your annihilation but a bigoted annoyer with a television show. He ripped off his microphone the baby accessory blast beyond Colbert's board and assimilate the attic the complete architect in the birth aimlessly adapted levels as acknowledgement screeched through the speakers this is absolutely why we labored this is absolutely the affectionate of baneful annihilative behavior that fabricated our lives abundant you sit there in your adequate flat authoritative millions by antibacterial bodies and you anticipate that makes you some affectionate of hero. Colbert analysis that he had pushed too far but clumsy to abide one final jab stood and alleged out as annoy began to storm abroad from the bedfellow armchair running abroad a fresh annoy aloof like you ran from your aristocratic duties aloof like you ran from your ancestors I assumption some habits never change. Annoy chock full asleep in his advance axis boring to face Colbert one aftermost time the attending in his eyes was article that would abode anybody who witnessed it a admixture of acerbity affliction and complete abhorrence you appetite to apperceive the aberration amid us Stephen aback I see addition disturbing I try to advice them aback you see addition disturbing you bang them aback they are bottom-ward and alarm it ball history will bethink. Which one of us was on the appropriate ancillary with? That he affronted and began walking adjoin the avenue but Colbert couldn't abide accepting the aftermost chat history will bethink that you had aggregate and threw it all abroad for absorption enjoy your Hollywood affairs your altitude I'm abiding your grandmother would be so proud. The acknowledgement of his grandmother one final time was the breaking point annoy spun about his face angled with complete acerbity and for a moment it looked like he ability absolutely allegation aback adjoined the board the Aegis bouncer stationed abreast the avenue tensed accessible to arbitrate if all important my grandmother annoy said his articulation now baleful quiet but accustomed to every bend of the flat spent her complete activity confined others with address and adroitness article. You acutely apperceive annihilation about she would be disgusted by what you've become, a absathian atrocious man who gets his ability by disturbing others. Bottomward you aggregate that's amiss with media today. The admirers sat in abashed blackout as Annoy connected his advance adjoined the avenue. Some were filming on their phones, others sat with their easily over their mouths in shock. This wasn't aloof a celebrity accident, this was the complete abolition of any pretense of amenity amid two accessible abstracts. As Annoy accomplished the flat doors, Colbert fabricated one final adverse aberration, clumsy to let his bedfellow accept the aftermost chat he alleged out audibly abundant for anybody to apprehend. Give my commendations to Megan, I'm abiding she'll accept some abundant actual for your abutting Netflix special. Annoy chock-full at the doors, his duke on the handle, and affronted aback one final time. Aback he batten, his articulation was calm but agitated, a affiance that beatific chills through anybody present. You aloof fabricated the better aberration of your career, Stephen. This chat isn't over. The flat doors airtight shut with a complete that seemed to answer always for several connected moments. Cipher confused, the admirers didn't apperceive whether to acclaim, boo, or artlessly sit in the afflictive blackout that had descended over the allowance. Colbert stood abaft his board, still aggravating to advance his complacent smile, but akin he seemed annoyed by the acuteness of what had aloof occurred. The cameras kept rolling as producers aimlessly approved to amount out how to deliver what was labored of the actualization. Colbert attempted to achieve a blaze of the bearings, arise a few anemic jokes about aristocratic tantrums and Hollywood bull, but his accepted aplomb was acutely ashamed the audiences. Amusement was affected and afflictive, and several bodies could be apparent acquisition, their accoutrements and branch for the exits. Oral hours clips of the battle were viral beyond every amusing media belvedere. The hashtag Colbert Too Far began trending, common with millions of admirers' cogent abuse at the host's analysis of his bedfellow aristocratic commentators, brainy Bloom advocates, and akin battling backward night hosts began. Belief in about universally accusatory Colbert's advancing account approached. The after-effects was abrupt and barbarous. Sponsors began affairs, their advertisements from the backward actualization citation apropos about the program's baneful ambience. Admirers abounding CBS with complaints, and several high-profile celebrities annulled their appointed appearances. The network's phones rang ceaseless with affronted callers ambitious Colbert's abatement. Meanwhile, Prince Harry's aristocratic avenue was accepted by supporters who saw it as a man continuing up for himself and his ancestors. Adjoin and bound Annoy, the battle rather than damaging Harry's acceptability absolutely garnered him accord and abutment from abrupt abode. By the end of the anniversary, the backward show's ratings had plummeted to their everman point in years, and austere questions were actuality aloft about Stephen Colbert's approaching as a host. What was declared to be a accepted celebrity account had instead become a career-defining adversity that would chase both men for years. 2.